Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I'm so thrilled you're joining me today because we are going to unpack one of the absolute most fascinating literary and historical patterns found in ancient biblical texts. We're essentially looking at a masterclass in structural storytelling, where a single, incredibly powerful motif repeats over thousands of years.
Now, you might be wondering, why does the Bible constantly use water to symbolize both horrific death and miraculous life? It's a complete paradox, right? But it's woven into the very fabric of the text. Okay, let's dive into this and uncover the hidden architecture of these ancient writings, where water is literally the ultimate double-edged sword.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. Noah and the Great Flood, 2. Moses and the Red Sea, 3. Jonah in the deep, 4. Jesus calms the storm, and finally, baptism and final judgment. Right, so this isn't just some isolated metaphor. We're talking about a timeline of water judgments spanning thousands of years of recorded history. From Genesis 6 all the way to the 1st century, we're going to trace exactly how this literary and historical motif develops, layer by layer. Let's start right at the beginning. Section 1, Noah and the Great Flood, Decreation and Recreation. So in Genesis 6, humanity's intentions are described as utterly sick, just full of hurtful, cursed souls. And to judge this, God brings about a literal decreation, flooding the world he made to totally purge it. But notice the specific Hebrew word used for Noah's rescue vessel, tavah. Noah finds unmerited, electing favor, and he's told to build this tavah to be saved from the anger of the flood. His entire family is saved through their identification and union with him inside this vessel, all while the Ruach, the Spirit, hovers over the waters, just waiting to usher in a new creation. And this brings us to a huge core thematic anchor for this entire explainer. The text points out that when God saves his people, he judges his enemies. His acts of judgment always have corresponding redemptive deeds. The destruction of the earth was simultaneously the exact mechanism for the salvation of Noah's family. They were brought safely through God's holy wrath, which makes the flood essentially a massive household baptism. They passed through the waters of death, making it a literal form of resurrection. Moving right along to Section 2, Moses and the Red Sea, recapitulating the flood. Fast forward a few generations to the book of Exodus. Pharaoh orders Hebrew boys to be drowned in the Nile River, so in response, Moses' mother creates a pitch-covered basket to save him, and the text uses that exact same word from Genesis, tiva. And this brilliantly illustrates the dual nature of the water. When Israel finally reaches the Red Sea, Moses stretches out his staff, and the waters divide by the Ruach, the Spirit. Israel crosses perfectly safe, without even a wet knee, but Pharaoh's legions? No way. They are crushed. They're buried in the deep, quick, gasping on the seafloor under the literal weight and heavy glory of Yahweh. Check out these linguistic breadcrumbs because we can actually prove this connection. Tehom, it means the deep waters. This specific word is found in Genesis describing the flood that judged the wicked, and it is intentionally used again in Exodus 15 to describe the waters violently covering the Egyptians. The deliverance was so absolute, and the passing through the wrathful waters so transformative that the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 literally calls the Exodus event a baptism. Which brings us right back to that core theme. His acts of judgment have corresponding redemptive deeds. For God's people, passing through these waters of death always constitutes both a death and a resurrection. The destruction of the enemy is the very mechanism of salvation for the covenant people. Next up on our timeline, we hit the era of the prophets. Section 3, Jonah in the deep, the sign of the dove. So Jonah decides to flee from the Lord's face, right? And God responds with these enormous, stormy seas, which is a direct echo of the great flood, meant to judge his rebellion. The sailors are absolutely terrified as the ship splits. Jonah realizes the only way to calm God's wrath is for him to be tossed into the abyss. He's plunged into the floodwaters and swallowed by a great fish. Jonah actually describes this as dropping into Sheol, the pit or the grave. But here's an incredibly fascinating detail from the source text. Jonah's name means dove, just like the bird in Noah's story. And in the original Hebrew, the gender of the fish actually changes in the text to feminine because it's described as being pregnant with his new birth. After 3 days, he is resurrected and spit out. And what does he get spit out onto? Yabashah, dry ground. Guys, this isn't an accident. This is brilliant textual design. Yabashah is the exact same Hebrew word used for what Noah stood on after the flood and what Israel walked on through the Red Sea. It is the unifying linguistic link of new creation, connecting Noah, Moses, and Jonah. So the crucial point is this. By the time we finish the Old Testament era, the reader is completely conditioned to understand this dynamic. The waters represent God's holy, crushing judgment, but traversing them by His grace yields new life and resurrection. And that brings us to the real climax of this explainer. Section 4, Jesus calms the storm, the greater salvation.
We are finally at the ultimate historical fulfillment of this thousands of years old water pattern. Think about those famous accounts of Jesus on the Sea of Galilee. The disciples are panicking, full of fearful souls, because an aggressive, deadly storm is raging around them. But what is the Lord doing? He is asleep in the boat. Have you ever wondered what the actual textual point of that miracle is?
Well, it's actually a living reenactment of the ancient motif. Step 1, Jesus arises from sleep, which points forward to Him arising from the sleep of death. Step 2, He speaks and hushes the storm of wrath, appeasing and quenching it. Step 3, the winds completely cease. And amazingly, the Greek used in Mark 4:39 for the wind ceasing deliberately echoes the Greek translation of Genesis 8 when the flood winds died down. Jesus is revealing Himself as the greater Noah, the greater Moses, and the greater Jonah.
Let's put this all together and synthesize this entire typological progression. Think about it. We have Noah facing the global flood, rescued by the Teva. We have Moses facing the Red Sea, rescued by parted waters. Jonah facing the stormy sea, rescued by the big fish. But Jesus? The threat He faces isn't just physical water. It's the ultimate wrath and hell. And His rescue method for His people is to plunge into it Himself. In Mark 10, Jesus literally calls His upcoming death a baptism. He took the ultimate baptism of God's wrath onto Himself to save His people.
Which leads us to our final application today. Section 5, Baptism and Final Judgment, the ultimate rescue. The source texts make it incredibly clear that the Genesis flood was actually a preview of the end-time final judgment. According to texts like Revelation, this judgment falls on everyone, but destinies diverge wildly based on union with the king. The wicked, much like Pharaoh's army, are cast into the lake, not of water, but of fire, with gnashing of teeth. But the righteous, because they are baptized and completely joined to the Son, the judgment has already passed over them. The punishment was completely taken by Christ in His own baptism of death. And this brings our entire chronological journey to its absolute peak. Yahweh Himself, the Lord Jesus Christ, steps into the waters of death so that He can rescue His people, not just from ancient literal floods or stormy seas, but from the ultimate final lake of fire. I want to leave you with a provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. The texts argue that a believer's water baptism is a profound mirror. It either points to the saving work of God the Son on your behalf, or if you walk away and disregard that sonship, it stands as a preview of awful punishment. So looking back at thousands of years of the covenant, ask yourself, if biblical waters are a mirror for ultimate judgment and salvation, what does your baptism point to? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep seeking, keep studying, and I will see you next time.